Hi students, Mr. C here, and one thing I'd like to talk to you today about is the volume of epoxy that we're going to need inside of your epoxy table that we're creating here. The bell. So what I'd like to do is just talk to you about how we figure this out so that way we make sure we have enough supplies here to go ahead and fill the epoxy. Epoxy is a relatively expensive material, so you don't want to be short on it and you don't want to end up ordering too much, okay? Because epoxy resin does have a life shelf of typically about 90 days from the manufacturer that we purchase from. Some epoxies might last a little bit longer, some might be a little bit shorter. It just depends on which manufacturer you're purchasing from, okay? Now the manufacturer that we're purchasing from, I did get a little bit of numbers so that way we can figure this out. Okay, the epoxy resin volume, which is the amount of volume that we're going to need to fill in all the spaces where the wood is not located. Okay, 1 gallon of epoxy resin in the hardener mixed is going to equal about 230 square inches once it's dried and cured and evaporated off. So now it's solidified and becoming like basically acrylic or plastic, right? So with knowing that number, what I had to do is I took the dimensions of the inside of this box, and the inside dimensions of this box are 44 inches by 22 inches by 1 3/4 inches deep. That's what our dimensions that we have to work with are. Then what I did was I basically assigned an approximate size for each piece of material. Now the wood size, size A, was approximately 595 square inches, and it's this piece right here. So that's what that one ended up being. Piece B, which is this piece right here, ended up being about 342 cubic inches. And then the last piece, which is a smaller one right here, ended up being about 159 square inches. Once I took all these dimensions, I subtracted it from the total amount of what we needed. We needed 1,694 square inches to fill in this whole thing. That's including the space that the wood takes. So I subtracted the wood amount, and I end up with 598 square inches, and that's about the amount of epoxy that we're going to need to fill in that whole area. Okay? So knowing that this is how many square inches that we need to fill in that area, and we already know how many square inches we're going to get out of a gallon, what I did was I took 230 square inches, which is how many square inches we get in a gallon, and then divide that by the 598, and we end up with exactly 2.6 gallons of epoxy is what's needed for this project. Now, the manufacturer we purchase from only sells it in 3-gallon allotments. 2 gallons of resin to 1 gallon of hardener, because it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So this batch buying is going to be perfect, okay? So we're going to use that. Now we do have some black diamond dye that we're going to be using inside of the epoxy to give it some effect, okay? You're going to see that in our next video when I start pouring the base color dyed epoxy, okay? And I'll show you how to mix that and how we go about pouring it. Remember, in our last video, we sealed all the pores in the epoxy, the walnut pieces right now. So we're in good shape to go ahead and start working with our project as far as getting the epoxy poured in to create the base to our table. So this is how we figure out the volume. This is something you're going to want to know before you even start your project, because that way you can figure out your price of your project, okay? Until next time, I'm Mr. C, and this is how to find the volume of the epoxy needed for your epoxy river table. All right, bye.